A poor maid discovers a secret photo in her billionaire boss's drawer and learns he may be her father. What happens next changes everything. Before we start, leave a comment and indicate which city you are sharing from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. I had been cleaning the mansion long enough to know which rooms demanded silence, which shelves hid dust no one dared to notice, and which drawers were always locked. Richard Hunter's house wasn't just a home. It was a fortress of glass and marble, filled with whispers I wasn't supposed to hear and objects I wasn't supposed to touch. I walked through it like a shadow, carrying a rag, a bucket, and the weight of a life I could never escape. I scrubbed, I polished, I pretended to be invisible. That day, I thought it would be the same as all the others. The air smelled of leather and expensive cologne as I entered his private study. It was the one room that frightened me most, not because of its size but because of the silence that lived in it. Dark wood panels absorbed the light, tall shelves pressed against the walls like judges, and his desk stood in the middle as though it had authority over everything. I wiped the surface carefully, terrified of leaving even the smallest smear. My eyes wandered toward the half-open drawer. Normally I would have walked past. I had been warned, never touch what isn't yours. But something in me hesitated, something I couldn't explain, and before I could stop myself my hand slid the drawer wider. At first I thought it was only papers, contracts, letters, the kinds of things a billionaire keeps hidden from people like me. But then I saw it. A photograph, old and faded, its edges curled as if it had been carried too many times in a pocket. My breath caught in my throat. The woman in the picture wasn't a stranger. It was my mother. Her hair was tied back the way she always wore it when she was younger, her smile shy, her eyes filled with the same stubborn kindness that had carried us through poverty. I touched the photo with trembling fingers, half convinced it was some cruel trick of the light. But it wasn't. It was her. My mother, the woman who had spent her life scrubbing other people's kitchens and sewing other people's dresses so I would have food, so I would survive. What was she doing in a drawer belonging to Richard Hunter, one of the wealthiest men in the country? I felt my knees weaken. 1,000 questions slammed into me at once. Had they known each other? Had she worked for him too long ago when she was young? Why would he keep her picture all these years if she was only another maid? Another face among thousands. My mother had died with secrets in her eyes. Secrets I thought were only about money she never had, opportunities she never found. But now I saw something else. I clutched the photo so tightly the edges bent. My heart pounded as if it wanted to break free from my chest. If anyone saw me with it, I could lose everything, my job, my only way to survive. Yet I couldn't put it back. It was proof that the man I worked for, the man whose footsteps echoed like thunder in these halls, was tied to my past in ways I could not yet understand. Behind me the floor creaked. I turned, and there he was, Richard Hunter, standing in the doorway, his sharp eyes fixed on me, the photo still trembling in my hand. The photograph shook in my hands like it carried a pulse of its own. I wanted to hide it, to slip it back into the drawer and pretend I had never seen it, but it was too late. Richard Hunter's eyes were already fixed on me, sharp as glass, his steps slow and deliberate as he entered the room. My instinct was to lower my gaze, to whisper some excuse about dusting, about accidentally touching what was not mine. But the words wouldn't come. My tongue felt dry, my chest tight. I stood frozen with my mother's face staring up at both of us from that small rectangle of paper. "What?" he said at last, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you holding?" I could have lied. I could have dropped it and blamed the draft, the cleaning, anything. Instead, my voice betrayed me with honesty. "It's my mother." The silence that followed pressed against the walls. His eyes narrowed, his stride faltered, and for the first time since I had worked in this mansion I saw something I never imagined possible in him: hesitation. He reached out with a trembling hand, snatched the photograph from my grip, and stared at it as though seeing it for the first time. For a long moment he said nothing. His lips parted once, then closed again. Finally he whispered a name I had not heard in years. "Evelyn." My breath caught. "You knew her?" Richard's gaze shifted to me, searching my face with a mixture of disbelief and recognition. He took a step closer, holding the photo like it might burn him. "How do you know this woman?" "She was my mother," I answered firmly, though my voice shook. "She raised me alone. She scrubbed floors and stitched clothes to keep me alive. And now I find her picture in your drawer. Why? Why do you have this?" The man who had always carried himself like steel suddenly seemed smaller, haunted. He dropped into the leather chair behind his desk, his hands gripping the edges as though he needed the wood to hold him upright. "I met her once," he said slowly, each word dragged from somewhere deep. "Many years ago, before the companies, before the houses, before any of this. She was different. I should have stayed. I should have fought. But I didn't. I chose ambition." His confession twisted inside me like a knife. I stepped closer, my fists clenched. "She never forgot you. She never stopped thinking about the man who left her behind. Do you know what it was like for her? To carry me alone? To die with nothing but regret?" Richard's head dropped, and for the first time his voice cracked. "I thought she had forgotten me. I told myself it was better that way. But she kept this alive?" I could barely hold my anger. "She kept you alive. In her memories. In her silence. And now I stand here with the truth you tried to bury." The room pulsed with our shared breathing, too loud, too sharp. I expected him to deny it, to throw me out and end the conversation. But instead he lifted his head, his eyes raw, unguarded. "If what you say is true, then we must know for certain." I frowned. "Know what?" He didn't hesitate. "Whether you are mine." His words struck like thunder. I felt the floor sway beneath me, my body suddenly weak. I wanted to scream, to run, to deny the possibility. But instead I stood there, trembling, my life splintering in ways I could no longer control. And in that moment I understood the next step would not be words. It would be proof. The days that followed were a blur. But not the kind that brings comfort or routine. It was the kind of blur that burns through your thoughts and leaves you unable to breathe properly. Richard's words echoed in my ears like a curse. "We must know for certain." I couldn't escape them. At night I lay awake in my small room at the far end of the mansion, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, clutching my blanket like it might anchor me to a life that was quickly slipping from my hands. Was he serious? Could he truly believe that I was his blood? And what if he was right? The question itself terrified me more than the answer ever could. When the day came, I didn't walk into the hospital on my own. Richard insisted on accompanying me. His presence was a storm, controlled on the outside, but I could feel the tremor beneath the surface. He didn't speak to me as we crossed the sterile corridors, but his silence said enough. People turned their heads when he passed, recognizing the billionaire with sharp features and a reputation for breaking empires. They whispered, some with respect, others with fear, but none of them noticed me, the girl trailing behind him, invisible in plain sight. I wondered if this was how my mother had felt beside him once, seen by him but ignored by the world. Inside the small room, the nurse gave us instructions. Her tone was professional, detached, but I could sense the curiosity beneath it. She must have wondered why a man like Richard Hunter had brought a maid into her lab for a DNA test. I sat on the cold chair, my palms damp, while she prepared the swab. The sterile smell of disinfectant pressed against my nose, mixing with the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. My hands trembled as I held the cotton-tipped stick between my lips, scraping the inside of my cheek as instructed. It seemed like such a small thing for such a massive question. Just a few cells, and the course of my life would either collapse or transform forever. Richard went next, his movements stiff but controlled. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. But when the nurse sealed our samples into 2 tiny tubes, I noticed his hand shake ever so slightly as he adjusted his cuff. He caught me watching and quickly turned away, as though ashamed that his armor had cracked even for a moment. The waiting room was worse than the test itself. We sat side by side, strangers bound by a truth neither of us was ready to face. I tried to distract myself by staring at the pale green walls, by counting the seconds on the clock that ticked too loudly, but nothing helped. My heart beat so hard it felt like the whole room could hear it. I thought of my mother again, her tired hands, her quiet sighs at night when she thought I was asleep, the look in her eyes that always carried something unfinished. What if this was the unfinished part of her story? What if she had carried the truth all her life, waiting for me to stumble into it the way I had stumbled into that drawer? Richard broke the silence first, his voice low, almost fragile. "If this is true, if you are mine, everything changes." I turned to him, my anger clashing with the hope I hated myself for feeling. Everything already changed the moment I found that photo. Whether or not this test says so, you can't erase that. He held my gaze, and for once there was no arrogance, no steel, only regret. You sound like her, he whispered. Your mother. She said things like that, things I didn't listen to at the time. I clenched my fists. Maybe now you'll listen. The nurse appeared again, holding a clipboard, her eyes cautious. The results will be processed shortly. Please wait here. And just like that, the room tilted again. Fear and hope twisted together inside me until I could barely sit still. I pressed my hands against my knees to stop them from shaking, but it was useless. My life was hanging on a piece of paper being printed in some quiet lab room down the hall. And as I waited, I realized something that chilled me more than anything. No matter what that paper revealed, nothing would ever be the same again. The nurse returned with a folder clasped tightly in her hands. It was remarkable how something so small, so thin, could carry the weight of my entire existence. She looked at Richard first, as if he were the only one who mattered, and for a moment I wanted to shout at her that this was my life, my mother's memory, my blood being measured. But my throat closed, and all I could do was watch as she extended the folder to him with a polite nod. Richard didn't take it right away. His hand hovered above the file, hesitant, like he feared the truth as much as I did. Finally, with a slow inhale, he opened it. I leaned forward, my heart pounding so loudly that it drowned out the hum of the fluorescent lights above us. His eyes moved quickly across the page, then stopped. He froze, and in that stillness I knew. My body knew before he spoke, before the words left his mouth. He lowered the paper slowly, his gaze fixed on me. For the first time since I met him, there was no distance in his eyes. No authority, no steel. Only disbelief and something else I couldn't name. His lips parted, and in a voice softer than I thought possible, he whispered, "It's true. You are my daughter." The words struck me harder than I imagined they could. I should have felt triumph or relief or even joy, but what filled me instead was a crushing weight. Yesterday, I had been a maid, invisible in a mansion that wasn't mine. Today, I was the daughter of a billionaire. A truth that should have elevated me only pressed me deeper into fear. I pressed my palms into my knees, my breath shaky. So all this time, while she worked herself to exhaustion, while I grew up with nothing, you lived like this? Richard's face tightened, his jaw clenched. I didn't know. If I had known. I cut him off with a trembling voice. If you had known what? You would have saved her? You would have saved me? Or would you have left us anyway because ambition meant more to you than love? He swallowed hard, his shoulders sagging as though every dollar he had ever made was nothing against this moment. I can't undo the past, but I can give you a future. Those words, though meant as a promise, made me shiver. A future. What did that even mean? Could money erase years of loneliness? Could mansions and clothes replace the nights I cried myself to sleep while my mother tried to hush her own tears in the next room? I didn't answer him. I couldn't. My mind was drowning in questions too large to voice. The nurse excused herself, leaving us in silence that felt heavier than any argument. Richard reached across the small table, his hand hovering near mine. "Lila," he said gently, "I want to make this right, but I need you to let me." I pulled my hand back slowly, afraid that if I let him touch me, I would crumble. "You can't make it right. You can only admit what you tried to forget. That's all this paper proves." His eyes darkened, but not with anger, something closer to shame. "Then let me start with honesty. You are not just another face in this house anymore. You are my blood, and no one will take that from you." His words were meant to steady me, but they only ignited a new fear. What would happen when the rest of his family heard this truth? What would they see when they looked at me? A daughter or an intruder? I left the hospital that day with the result burning in my chest like a brand. I should have felt stronger, but instead I felt exposed, like the world was about to turn its gaze on me for the first time, and not kindly. And I was right, because the moment I stepped back into the mansion, 3 pairs of eyes were already waiting for me. The silence in the mansion when I returned was different from before. It wasn't the silence of polished marble or the hush of expensive halls. It was heavier, like the stillness before a storm. The staff avoided my eyes, whispering as I passed, their gazes flickering toward me as if I had suddenly become someone they couldn't recognize. And then I saw them. His children, Eliza, Claire, and James, gathered in the grand living room like a tribunal waiting to deliver its judgment. Eliza, the eldest, was the first to speak. Her posture was rigid, her chin lifted high, her voice dripping with scorn. So it's true. The rumors aren't rumors anymore. You've come here to claim his name, haven't you? I froze in the doorway, clutching the strap of my worn handbag like it was the only shield I had. I didn't claim anything. I only found the truth. Claire, sharp-eyed and cold, let out a laugh without humor. The truth? Don't dress it up. You were the maid, cleaning our floors yesterday, and today you expect us to call you sister? Do you even hear how absurd that sounds? Their words stung, but it was their eyes that cut deepest, eyes filled not with curiosity but with contempt. I tried to stand taller, but the weight of their judgment pressed me down. I never asked for this, I whispered. I never wanted to take anything from you. Eliza stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble, her presence looming. You think that matters? This house, this family, this world, it's not for you. You don't belong here. You're an outsider who happened to get lucky with a piece of paper. James, the youngest, stood apart from them, silent, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. I searched his face for something softer, some sign of kindness, but he gave me nothing, at least not yet. Claire folded her arms, her voice cutting through the room. Do you know what people are already saying? That you're a gold digger. That you saw an opportunity and took it. That you don't care about him or about us. You only care about what his money can give you. I shook my head quickly, my voice trembling. That isn't true. I came here because my mother's face was in his drawer, because I needed answers. I didn't even know where it would lead. Eliza smirked, cruel satisfaction flickering in her eyes. And now you know. Leads nowhere. You can play the poor orphan all you want, but you will never be one of us. You're nothing but the help who got too close. Her words landed like a slap, leaving me breathless. I wanted to fight back, to scream that I didn't choose this truth, that I didn't choose him or this house or their hatred. But the anger in their faces left me paralyzed. Then Richard entered. His presence shifted the air immediately, commanding silence even from his own children. His gaze swept across them, then landed on me. Enough, he said firmly. She is my daughter, and she will be treated as such. Eliza turned on him, her voice sharp with betrayal. Father, you can't mean that. You can't expect us to accept her as if she belongs here. Richard's tone was colder than I'd ever heard it. I don't expect. I require. Lila is part of this family, whether you like it or not. But his words didn't soothe me. If anything, they deepened the gulf. Because I could feel their resentment hardening, growing heavier by the second, and I knew that no command, not even from him, could force acceptance where there was only bitterness. I stood there silent, surrounded by walls that gleamed with wealth yet closed in on me like a cage. And as their eyes pierced into me, I realized something chilling. Finding my father was only the beginning. The true battle would be surviving his family. I thought that stepping out of the servants' quarters into a room of my own would feel like a miracle, but instead it felt like walking into someone else's skin. The bedroom Richard gave me was larger than the tiny apartment where I had spent my entire childhood with my mother. The bed was wide enough to swallow me whole, its white sheets crisp and scented faintly of lavender. A wardrobe taller than me stood against the wall, already filled with dresses I had never dreamed of wearing. On the vanity lay a box with jewelry, delicate chains, pearl earrings, bracelets that shimmered under the soft light. I touched them with hesitant fingers, as if they would dissolve the moment I accepted they were mine. But the moment I stepped into the hallway, reality reminded me that these walls, no matter how golden, were not meant to welcome me. Eliza's laugh drifted from the stairwell, sharp and cruel. Look at her, she whispered loudly enough for the staff to hear. From mop to silk in a single day. What a fairy tale. The maids, girls who once spoke to me as one of their own, now lowered their eyes when I passed, afraid of being seen taking my side. Their silence hurt almost as much as the insults. Meals became another battlefield. At the long dining table, I sat stiffly across from Claire, who toyed with her fork as though the food itself had offended her. So, she said one evening, her voice dripping with sarcasm, tell us, Lila, what does it feel like to scrub floors one week and sit at this table the next? Do you feel dizzy from the climb? My cheeks burned, but before I could respond, Richard set his glass down firmly. That's enough. His voice silenced the room, but not the hatred in their eyes. Eliza smirked at her sister as if they had won some invisible game, and James lowered his gaze to his plate, refusing to look at me or them. The days stretched endlessly. I attended fittings for clothes I never wanted, smiled stiffly at the butler who addressed me as Miss Hunter, and tried to study the textbooks Richard had bought for me, though the words blurred when I thought of my mother who had sacrificed everything just so I could finish high school. I told myself this was a gift, a chance at a life she would have wanted for me. But every corner of the mansion whispered the same reminder. You don't belong here. At night, I lay awake listening to the distant echo of laughter from Eliza's wing, or the click of Claire's heels across the marble floors. Sometimes I heard whispers, mockery cloaked in shadows. Once I overheard Eliza speaking to a group of her friends in the garden. She'll never last here. She's a stain on this family's name. Father can play his games, but we'll make sure she remembers what she is. Their laughter sliced through me more than any knife could. And yet, amid all the hostility, there was one flicker of light. James, the youngest, was different. He didn't speak much in the beginning, but one afternoon I found him in the library, his arms full of books. He looked startled to see me but didn't sneer. Instead, he placed a thick biology textbook on the table in front of me. You said you wanted to study medicine, right? His voice was quiet, almost shy. This one helped me when I was preparing for exams. Maybe it'll help you too. The kindness in his gesture nearly broke me. I nodded, whispering a thank you, my throat tight with emotion I couldn't hide. For the first time since the hospital, I felt seen, not as a threat, not as an intruder, but as a person. Still, even that small kindness couldn't drown out the shadows that stalked me through the mansion. Every corridor seemed to carry the echo of my sister's contempt. Every servant's glance reminded me that I was caught between two worlds, no longer a maid, not yet a daughter. And one night, as I prepared for bed, I found an envelope slipped under my door. My name was scrawled across it in jagged letters. I opened it with trembling hands and read the words that made my blood run cold. Leave before you destroy everything. You don't belong here. The letter haunted me through the night. I read it again and again until the words blurred into shadows on the page. Each time I folded it back, slipped it under my pillow, and tried to sleep, the same thought returned. Someone in this house wanted me gone badly enough to threaten me. The handwriting was sharp, uneven, almost rushed. I didn't know if it was Eliza or Claire, or if it was someone among the staff who now whispered about me when I entered a room. Whoever it was, the message was clear. I was an intruder. By morning, the mansion felt colder. Every glance seemed sharper, every silence heavier. At breakfast, Eliza's eyes lingered on me with the satisfaction of a hunter who already knew her prey was wounded. Claire stirred her coffee slowly. Her lips curved in a cruel little smile, though she said nothing. I forced myself to eat, though every bite tasted like ash. I didn't dare mention the letter to Richard. I knew it would only ignite another war inside the house, one I wasn't strong enough to fight yet. Later that day, I fled to the library, the only place in the mansion where I could breathe. The high shelves seemed to hide me, and the scent of old books gave me comfort that silk sheets and chandeliers never could. I was seated at the heavy oak table, pretending to read, when I heard quiet footsteps approach. I looked up and there was James holding 2 cups of tea. He placed one in front of me without a word, then sat across from me, his dark hair falling slightly into his eyes. You look like you haven't slept, he said softly. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I'm just not used to all of this. He studied me for a long moment, then leaned closer. It's them, isn't it? Eliza and Claire. They won't stop until they break you. My throat tightened, but I forced a smile. I can handle it. James shook his head. No one can handle it alone. He reached into his bag and pulled out a stack of books, biology, anatomy, chemistry. I know you want to study medicine. I thought maybe these would help. They're not easy, but I'll go through them with you if you want. I know what it's like to feel out of place in this family. His words startled me. You. He gave a humorless laugh. I'm the youngest. The spare. Eliza and Claire treat me like decoration at best, a nuisance at worst. Father sees me as a boy who hasn't proven anything yet. So yes, I understand. For the first time, I saw him not as one of them, but as someone who carried his own shadows. The walls I had built inside me cracked just a little. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I don't know why you're being kind, but thank you." He leaned back, his expression gentler now. "Because someone has to be. And because I believe you're not here to take anything from us. You just want a chance." Something in my chest loosened, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. I nodded, blinking back tears. That's all I ever wanted. We sat together for hours, not just studying but talking about my mother, about his dreams, about how lonely it could feel to live in a house full of people and still be unseen. For the first time since discovering the truth, I felt less like a stranger. But when I returned to my room that evening, another envelope was waiting under my door. This one carried only 3 words, scrawled in the same jagged hand as before. "Next time worse." My hand shook as I held it, and for the first time, I realized that support from James might not be enough to shield me from the storm that was coming. The second letter left no room for doubt. Someone wanted me to feel unsafe in this house. I held it in my trembling hands, staring at the jagged handwriting. The words "next time" worse echoing louder in my mind than the ticking of the clock on the wall. I locked the door behind me and sat on the bed, pressing the paper against my knees, as if holding it tightly could keep the fear from spilling into every corner of the room. I thought about showing it to Richard, but then I imagined his face, his anger boiling over, his voice shaking the walls, his daughters twisting the truth until I became the villain instead of the victim. No, I couldn't give them that satisfaction. I had been invisible most of my life. I knew how to survive silence. But fear was something different. Fear crawled under my skin and whispered that I didn't belong here, that they would make sure of it. That night I barely slept. I thought every creak in the corridor was someone outside my door, every shadow a threat. By morning, I forced myself out of bed, washed my face, and walked through the mansion as though nothing had happened. The staff's whispers seemed louder than ever. They stopped speaking when I entered the kitchen, glances darting between me and the floor. One maid muttered under her breath, "She won't last long." I pretended not to hear, but my stomach tightened like a fist. The blow came later that afternoon. Richard's name was trending in the news, his image plastered on every screen in the lounge. But this time the headlines weren't about business. They were about me. Billionaire's secret daughter? Servant or schemer? The photographs made me nauseous. Blurred shots of me entering the hospital with him, walking through the mansion grounds, even carrying a tray in my maid's uniform. The captions painted me as a fraud, a gold digger who had clawed her way into his life. I stood frozen in front of the screen, my hands shaking, while Eliza and Claire entered the room behind me. Their laughter was cruel and sharp, echoing like broken glass. "See," Eliza said, her voice sweet with poison. "Now the whole world knows what you are. A story, a scandal. Nothing more." Claire leaned close to my ear, her whisper cold. "Letters and rumors weren't enough. Now you'll be hated everywhere, not just here." I wanted to scream at them, to tear the smugness from their faces, but my voice betrayed me. It cracked when I tried to speak, and they walked away triumphant, their heels clicking against the marble like a victory march. Hours later, Richard stormed into the dining hall, the newspaper clenched in his fist. His face was pale, his jaw set. He looked at me not with suspicion but with something harsher, determination. "Whoever is doing this will regret it," he said firmly. "I won't let them destroy you." I could barely meet his eyes. But what if they're right? What if everyone believes I'm nothing but a thief who came for your money? His voice rose, sharp and unshakable. "Then let them believe what they want. I know the truth. You are my daughter, and I will protect you." His words were meant to shield me, but I knew they would only fuel the fire. His family's hatred, the staff's whispers, the world's judgment, none of it would disappear because he declared me his blood. If anything, it would only grow stronger. That night, as I lay in bed, the second letter still on my nightstand, I realized the truth. Being Richard Hunter's daughter would never just mean luxury. It meant war. And someone in this house, or outside it, was already sharpening their knives. After the storm of articles and whispers, I thought my life in the mansion would collapse completely. I avoided mirrors because I no longer recognized the girl reflected there. No longer the maid, not yet the daughter, only a scandal dragged into the light for everyone to dissect. But Richard was relentless. He refused to let me sink into the shadows. One morning he entered the library where I had been hiding with my textbooks, his voice calm but resolute. "You always spoke about studying medicine," he said, pulling out the chair across from me. "You wanted to heal, not to be trapped here fighting with ghosts. Let me give you that chance." I laughed bitterly, unable to hide the edge in my voice. "And what? The world will welcome me? A girl the newspapers already call a liar, a gold digger? No school will take me seriously." Richard slid an envelope across the table. Inside were documents, applications already prepared, recommendations signed with names of people so powerful I barely recognized them. "They will take you seriously," he said, "because you've earned the right to be more than this mansion, more than their hatred. And because I will stand behind you." The weight of that envelope made my chest ache. I thought of my mother, who had spent her life bent over sewing machines and sinks so I might have a chance at education. She had whispered once, late at night when she thought I was asleep, "I just want her to have the life I never did." My throat tightened as I touched the papers. "She would have wanted this," I whispered. The weeks that followed were suffocating with tension. Eliza and Claire barely spoke to me, but when they did, their words were barbed. "Medical school?" Claire sneered one evening. "What will you heal, Lila? Broken hearts from men who pity you." Eliza added sharply, "Don't waste father's money. It won't make you one of us." I said nothing, though the insults carved deep. Instead, I clung to my studies with desperation. James helped me, often slipping into the library with notes, flashcards, even practice questions from his old exams. "Ignore them," he told me one night, his voice firm. "The best revenge is proving them wrong." His quiet support gave me strength. A reminder that not all of Richard's children despised me. The day the acceptance letter arrived, my hand shook so badly I could hardly tear it open. Richard stood beside me, silent but expectant, while James hovered near the door pretending not to listen. When I finally read the words, "Admitted into the program," the air left my lungs. I dropped into the chair, clutching the letter to my chest, tears spilling freely. "I'm going to be a doctor," I whispered, almost unable to believe it. "Mama, I'm going to do it." Richard's hand landed gently on my shoulder. "She would be proud. And so am I." But even as joy filled me, fear lingered. I knew Eliza and Claire would not soften overnight. I knew the whispers outside these walls would not vanish just because a school had given me a chance. The road ahead was long, filled with judgment and obstacles. Yet for the first time since stepping into this mansion, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt purpose. And deep down, I sensed that purpose might one day be the only bridge strong enough to reach the sisters who now saw me as nothing but a rival. Years slipped by faster than I expected, each one pulling me further away from the timid maid who once wandered the mansion's halls with her eyes lowered. Medical school was not easy. It demanded more from me than I thought I could give. Long nights of study, endless exams, the constant reminder that I was still seen as the girl whose name had been dragged through newspapers. Yet each obstacle only fueled me. I carried my mother's memory with me into every lecture hall, every hospital ward, whispering to myself that I was not doing this for money, not for Richard's approval, but for the promise I had made to her in silence, to become more than the life she had endured. When I finally received my license, the weight of it in my hands felt heavier than gold. I cried quietly that night, not from exhaustion, but from the knowledge that I had crossed a threshold no insult, no rumor could take from me. I had built something that was truly mine. Somewhere along the way, life brought me Oliver. He was a pharmacist, gentle yet determined, someone who saw me not as the billionaire's daughter or the former maid but as Lila, a woman who had fought through shadows to stand on her own feet. He made me laugh when I was too tired to breathe, steadied me when doubt threatened to consume me. When he asked me to marry him, I didn't hesitate. I knew this was not another twist of fate, it was choice. For once I was choosing happiness. When our daughter was born, I named her Evelyn after my mother. Holding her in my arms for the first time, I felt something I had never known before. A sense of completion. All the years of fear, humiliation, rejection, all the sleepless nights, they melted into the warmth of her tiny fingers wrapped around mine. I whispered to her that she would never grow up invisible, that she would never doubt she belonged in this world. It was Richard who insisted on celebrating her first birthday with a family gathering. At first I resisted, afraid of reopening wounds, but he was insistent. "It's time," he said, his voice firm yet kind. And so I returned to the mansion, not as the maid who once carried buckets, not as the scandal splashed across tabloids, but as a woman who had carved her place in the world. The house looked the same, marble floors, chandeliers, walls that once pressed down on me like a prison. Yet this time I did not shrink under their weight. Oliver stood beside me, Evelyn in my arms, and when Eliza and Claire entered the room, I braced myself for the coldness I remembered too well. But it did not come. Eliza's gaze lingered on my daughter, her sharp features softening in a way I never thought possible. Claire approached cautiously, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch Evelyn's tiny hand. "She looks like your mother," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "I remember her picture in Father's drawer." Something shifted in that moment. The hostility that had once poisoned every glance seemed to waver. They were not suddenly my friends, not suddenly loving sisters, but for the first time, they saw me not as a rival or an intruder. They saw me as a mother, as family. Richard raised his glass during dinner, his voice breaking as he said, "To new generations, to second chances, and to the family we almost lost." His eyes glistened when they met mine, and for once I felt no bitterness, only gratitude that life had given me back a piece of what my mother was denied. As laughter filled the dining room, I realized something profound. Reconciliation does not always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the small gestures of acceptance, in the hands that no longer push you away, in the shared love for a child who carries the future in her smile. That night, as I held Evelyn close, I whispered a final truth to myself. I had walked into this house as a maid, invisible, unwanted. I had uncovered a secret that shattered everything I thought I knew. I had fought battles against hatred, against fear, against my own doubts. And in the end, I had found not only a father, not only siblings, but something greater. I had found a place where I finally belonged,